For the fourth session, for chairs, we have with us Dr. Shikha Jain and Dr. Neeti Trivedi. Dr. Shikha Jain's extensive portfolio covers a diverse range of conservation, World Heritage and museum projects across India and overseas. She has advised government organizations and UNESCO offices in Singapore, Malaysia, UAE, Myanmar, and Indonesia. She represented India on the UNESCO World Heritage Committee and as a bureau member at the 45th session of the World Heritage Committee. Dr. Neeti Trivedi currently heads the Department of Architecture and PhD at MIT School of Architecture, Pune. She has cumulative 20 years of experience in academia, research, and the development sector. She has led urban planning and development projects in India and Australia. As a senior planner for PMRDA, she has contributed to the preparation of development plans for Pune's metropolitan region. She has collaborated with NGOs, civil society, and local authorities on Australia-India Council projects and slum improvement initiatives. She has published widely and is a recipient of 3 prestigious Australian scholarships and a Vice Chancellor's Award for her master's research. I would like to ask Dr. Munjal to please felicitate our chairs. Please give a round of applause. So we have 4 presentations in session 4. The first is by co-authored by Zarna, Surendra, Shah, and Sanjukta Das, and we have Zarna with us.
Should I wait for ma'am? Good afternoon, everyone. Heritage Conservation in Ekamrashetra, Navigating Identity, Context, and the Developmental Changes. Myself, Zarna Shah, founder and principal architect at MATI. My co-author, Sanjukta Das, could not join us today. Our research examines how to balance cultural preservation with developmental pressures using Ekamrashetra as a case study. India's heritage isn't just historical, it's living and is intertwined with community practices, making its conservation both urgent and complex. Understanding the regional context of conservation, analyze the cultural, historical, and architectural significance, explore the impact. Can I get some light here, please? Sorry. Explore the impact of identity, both cultural and regional, religious, on conservation strategies, assess developmental pressures, and propose strategies for sustainable, context-sensitive conservation. So the methodology was that we have collected primary data done through site mapping, stakeholder interviews, and direct observations, interviews with the local communities. The secondary data was through the government reports, archives, charters, and scholarly research. Analysis study has been conducted at 3 levels: macro, micro, and component, which I will go through in further slides. So the historical and cultural significance was established. Ekamrashetra, the ancient temple town, dates back to the 7th century BC, features Kalinga temple architecture, Astha Ayatna, each with the temples and the precinct. Pilgrim routes are ritually and symbolically connected to the Lingaraj temple. These are the land use map developed through the GIS methodology and character appraisal of the architecture of Bhubaneswar temple town. This is the map for the Bindusagar Lake and Astha Ayatna pilgrim routes. Next, we have the Yatra routes, how they start and where they reach, and the existing spaces of the Bhubaneswar. The study was done in 2016, so currently we cannot see many of things which are present in the mapping. This is the character appraisal map which we have done, where we are showing the character of the temple town. So each and every houses were documented, mutts, the temples and everything was documented, and the character appraisal was given to it. The character is defined by its blend of architectural brilliance, spiritual vibrancy, and communal life. So we cannot just do the architecture, but we have to understand how the streets, the nodes, the activities work around, and also the analysis of the sacred and specular spaces with the architectural details. So on the basis of the whole study, the SWOT analysis was done, and this is the map where we actually pointed out the issues around the Ekamrashetra heritage zone, where many issues were regarding the traffic, the spaces. So in further slides, I will show you that we have proposed some guidelines for the location. So these were the developmental challenges which we are facing now. The sacred spaces are being converted into commercial hubs. There is a loss of livelihoods and traditional spaces for local communities. The younger generation is not willing to continue the craft because of the financial instability and modernization. And we all know the current strategies and critics which Ekamrashetra development plan is showing. So in future we will see something like this. So to understand in depth, we have done a comparative case study of Varanasi and Ayodhya development plans, how the development plans and strategies were implemented in both the redevelopment projects. So we have come up with the positive outcomes and the negative impacts which the project has given to us in categories of cultural identity, community, heritage structures, tourism and economy, urban aesthetics. I will go in brief with the comparison of all these redevelopment projects with the Bhubaneswar. So majorly for Bhubaneswar, what we can see is in the similar pattern, there is a risk of modernization designs overlaying the cultural authenticity. We can see the displacement of families and small businesses around the heritage precincts. There is urbanization pressure threatening small structures. We have seen in that case for the Bhubaneswar, the small shrines were removed, and there is no documentation for that, unfortunately. So addressing these challenges require a shift towards community driven and inclusive strategies. These were the original proposed guidelines which we had given for the Ekamrashetra area, which we documented that time, and we had given the proposed spaces also, and how the traffic can be regulated, how we can rejuvenate the ponds and the lakes which we have. So moving forward, the main agenda for this paper is not what documentation and all these things are done, but it is how we should take forward, because we have 3 examples in front of us which have redevelopment projects done, but I guess we are not covering up everything. We need to see with a different perspective. So addressing the developmental challenges in Bhubaneswar old historic town, heritage conservation requires a multifaceted approach that balances urban growth with the preservation of cultural assets. By adapting context-specific conservation model that fosters community by participation, aligning the policies, reviving traditional knowledge, and implementing adaptive reuse strategies, Bhubaneswar can investigate, navigate the complexities of modernization while honoring its rich heritage identity. So what we are proposing is there can be a community-centric conservation, traditional knowledge revival, adaptive reuse strategies, and policy alignment. The policy alignment is the major portion where we need to focus, that we need to reform our policies, whether it is the AMSR Act or we consider the INTACH Charter. We need to look into that in a holistic manner, that it should be context specific. We are talking about the culture and heritage, but all the cities, towns in India, they are not same. So we need to shift ourselves with a different perspective. So for the conclusion and findings, we will say that India's rich cultural heritage is facing increasing pressure from urbanization and tourism. Drawing lessons from these 3 culturally significant heritage zones, Bhubaneswar, Varanasi, and Ayodhya, reveals common challenges and region-specific dynamics. The research highlights the need for holistic context-specific conservation practices that balance heritage preservation with cultural identity, local community empowerment, and integrating the traditional knowledge system and the economic development. So in our paper, we have detailed out what can be this approach for the major points which we are discussing right now. So our question is, how can we ensure heritage sites remain relevant in rapidly modernizing context? Moving forward, conservation efforts must embrace interdisciplinary strategies, policy alignment, and adaptive reuse to ensure that heritage sites remain the dynamic living spaces. With that, I will end my presentation. Thank you. Close it. Pen drive. Thank you.
Next, we have Abhilasha Sharma. Which one? Yeah, the second.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Abhilasha Sharma. I would be talking about developmental paradigms which are challenging the pink city. And I have my own practice in Jaipur, and I have been pretty much interested in how the developments are going with the practical side, with the heritage side. So looking at the city of Jaipur, we would like to break it down in three portions with respect to the development. First being the walled city, which was originally inscribed in 1727. Thank you. So first the walled city, which was inscribed in 1727. And the second part being the 20th century development later done outside of the walls of the city. And the third being the modern and still growing development of the Jaipur city. This is a plan of the Heritage World City of Jaipur. It bagged the title of UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2019, which included and appreciated the gridiron pattern planning at the foothills of Aravalli, basically utilizing the plain area of the valley. And it was developed as a commercial center, basically, a commerce and a trade center. And there have been the main crisscrosses of the primary roads of the city of Jaipur formed choppers or public spaces, basically public squares. Right now in the world, the inscription of the World Heritage Site of Jaipur, it is worth noting that the facades, the main facades of the bazaars and the public spaces are inscribed, but the havelis inside of these chokris are not a part of this inscription. The second part is this one. So basically outside of the walled city, it was, the three schemes were developed, the A scheme, B scheme and C scheme, out of which there was basically an encouragement to develop C scheme the first, where the plots were divided amongst influential and trade-oriented families of Jaipur. So basically here we would see big bungalows sprawling with lawns and shorter boundaries so as to still follow a gridiron pattern in the planning. They did attempt it, but also encouraging more public and human interaction along with green spaces. So first of all, let's look at the walled city. So here we are seeing one of the facades of the Johari Bazaar. You can see the colonnaded bazaars where there is space to move for pedestrians just adjacent to the roads, and the facades are still intact in terms of what their original shape was, although obviously with some alterations over time, but still it follows a certain facade or the way it was. And even with the functionality of the bazaars down on the ground floor level, you can see that the uniformity is still maintained. However, once we get into the inside lanes, so this is one of the prominent havelis. It is called the Ghadi Sazo Ki Haveli. Basically, if you can see at the top, a clock used to be there. So in the olden times when nobody would know what the time was, they would refer to this haveli as, a clock tower. But when we spoke to people who were residing inside the haveli, so because of multiple brothers and generations, it's under dispute, so they cannot sort of conserve it. Even the process of conservation is economically very strong. So not everybody has those means to actually go with the natural materials which are supposed to be put in such structures. Hence, to modify it to their likings, they use materials which are not so cohesive with the built fabric. This is one extreme of the people who own these havelis privately, that, through resources or anything, they do not have the capacity to conserve these structures. The other end is when the people want to move out of the walled city. They want to sell off their land or their havelis. And in that pursuit, a lot of havelis are seeing this kind of a site today, where the entire structure is demolished or it is modified completely into a modern world. Even when they also want to upgrade their lifestyle to live a better lifestyle, probably hold more cars, air-conditioned rooms, big luxurious spaces. And to achieve that, they find it challenging with the confinements of these structures here. On the other hand, looking at the positives when it comes to inside the wall city is an example like the Johri. So the Johri is a boutique hotel which transformed Lal Haveli into a boutique residential stay. And it also is very popular when it comes to fine dining. It basically is like it's a corner Haveli when you go right inside the Johri Bazaar. But it is worth noting that this work took a good around 5 years to get accomplished to what it is right now. And it also took a lot of financial means to build it the way it is today. So it is basically a luxurious side and development of a place in the walled city. Coming next to the 20th century development. So when we speak about C scheme, here in the map, if you can see the central circle over there is the statue circle, where it is written the Palacia Apartments. That entire road is Prithviraj Road, and the next node right after the Palacia Apartments is known as Bagadia Bhavan. The entire area is known by a name of one house, basically, and it still popularly is. A lot of people don't even know that there is this house out after which this area is named. So the idea of this is how it looks. So basically a grand sort of a junction point where subtle buildings are there, and the height restriction, the height limitation is such that it does not overpower the surrounding area of the statue circle. Whereas if you look at it in this picture, on the right, on the left bottom corner, you can see another high-rise building coming up right behind the income tax office. So whereas over these areas, houses like this were predominant. This is the Bagadia Bhavan a few days back, and it was sadly taken down. At the same time, this is the Palacia which has come up. So the resultant of it is that because Jaipur's heritage is known for the walled city and the 18th century development, the 20th century development is not coming into notice, and it is not considered as heritage, and the pace of taking down such structures is rapidly increasing. Also, it is a challenge because such high rises do not cater to the infrastructure that is over there. Similarly, when we look at the broader urban scale perspective, from Albert Hall till the Patrika Gate, what is how the development is happening is that the area of the Albert Hall is dominated by the building itself, and where the red box is, that is where a new high-rise is coming up, which will eventually look like this, hampering the urban scape of the Albert Hall. Similarly, as we go down the same street, what we see is that there have been more developments which have happened over the time, which one of which was the Jawahar Kala Kendra, which is still blending to the entire scape of the city. But then going and moving forward to a structure as the World Trade Park, which dominates the city. And towards the end, at the end of the JLN road, is the Patrika Gate, which is again a monumental scaled development, but how people are perceiving it is the heritage of Jaipur when it is not. So basically identifying the gaps between these perceptions is that there needs to be more knowledge in terms of how a structure is represented. The gaps are not just from the public, but even at the end of the government agencies and even us as practitioners. So the entire culmination of this research is that how these conversations can be started so that the development that we are seeing in the city, which is only known for the pink city, what are the points of concerns and how do we move ahead about them? So one of them is that we really need to identify the 20th century developments, because if we don't do that at a quicker pace, they would actually soon be endangered, first of all. Second of all is that with the government, so Heritage Cell was established when Jaipur was named the World Heritage Site. And many steps have been taken, like a vigilance cell, etc., to ensure that the developments have been made in a certain way. But that there is still a gap between what needs to happen and what should happen. So maybe another body can be culminated of experts, not just engineers, but conservation architects, urban planners, and more people who are related to this field who can see the heritage from different perspectives. And finally, obviously, community engagement comes to the core, not just through the monumentals and the main heritage, which is in the face, so to say, but also to make them realize the communal value again. So the chowkadis inside the main facades of the city, even inside those neighborhoods, there are many heritage walks which are already in place, but except for just the heritage walks, some activities or some more initiatives need to be taken so that the communities of even varied tastes can come together and realize and become more informed about how they can go ahead with this. And another thing, lastly, would be to say that for the conservation to be taken at a personal level, some initiatives of some subsidiaries from the government along with the privates, or some basically to have an incentive-based approach. For example, the heritage license for any boutique hotel or restaurant, if it is a heritage property, there are a lot of leeways that are there so that you get those licenses. You can open a bar along with 5 rooms or something like that, where it's profitable for them also to develop the heritage and for the government also. So taking such steps would definitely, I think, will make an impact. Thank you.
Next is Sayam, Mulani and Johan Patel.
Good afternoon. My name is Sayam and my co-author is Johan. We are both architects, recently graduated from Mumbai University. And today we are presenting our thesis as resource papers titled Cultural Resilience, a potential way forward for the preservation of Indian metropolitans. So as a lot of our discourse has been today also about like how the development of is progressing at a very rapid stage in our country especially, that a lot of our heritage and socio-cultural fabric is being neglected just to perhaps push globalization or Western aspirations of growth and modernization. So what exactly is that doing? A study in 2019, which was the livability index, ranked Mumbai as 119 worldwide. And that low score is basically attributed to a lack of public social infrastructure and lack of government initiative and bylaws to support institutes that can hold public spaces. So yeah, the sort of project looks at trying to envision public space or the public realm from the lens of cultural resilience. So what is cultural resilience exactly? Cultural resilience for a city is its ability to retain its authentic essence while adapting to a rapidly changing environment. So the project aims to understand how our cities and its culture can be made resilient to balance the need for globalization while still catering to preserving local culture. Again, a lot of the discourse that Menon saw in the beginning sort of highlighted. The study sort of in the background started with looking at native towns or native town areas of Bombay, perhaps 150 to 200 years old, and how some of them have stayed relevant. Perhaps how we view them or their perception has changed, but still stayed relevant and aspirational, while some have definitely declined over time. This slide is to sort of give an overview of our entire project as we detail out in the coming slides. And what we notice is that in a lot of these neighborhoods, what was very specific was a cultural core which made it possible for a lot of these neighborhoods to stay relevant over time, to keep adapting. Sometimes it was a typology, an architectural typology, or sometimes it was just simply the socio-cultural fabric, perhaps common religious attributes, stuff like that. And a lot of times we were able to sort of track it down to, if it was a built space, we understood it as propelling heritage, which is something that is, the theory is given by Aldo Rossi. Looking forward, what we sort of try to summarize in this paper is that we try to provide for research framework of how to locate these spaces which have the potential to hold socio-cultural fabric while adapting to globalization, to map them, to identify these culturally significant places, and perhaps in a way to try to formulate a methodology, although still very crude in our paper, try to formulate a methodology where at least the core values can be identified, and perhaps that can be changed and applied based on the context. So again, what is exactly city resilience? Resilience for any city is the ability to withstand, respond, and adapt readily to any kind of adversity so that the people living and working there can thrive and survive. And much like most of our metropolitans, there's a big need for cultural resilience. So the city can keep retaining the authentic essence, whether that the definition of how we define authentic essence is obviously very context based, and how that can be used to adapt to as the sort of fabric entirely changes. So going into how we sort of came about with the framework is we understood the endemic neighborhoods such as Girgaon, Dadar Parsi Colony, Bhuleshwar and Baikala. While some of these stayed relevant based on maybe how a certain architectural typology was, we understood what kept them relevant. Sometimes it was a sense of belonging, as in the case of the other Parsi colony. Yes, of course, also the means to conserve them, but a sense of belonging that this is the community space. This is how the community should look like. A sense of ownership. A lot of Girgaon has a lot of native towns, or as we call it, urban villages, where even though there aren't bylaws to preserve some of these houses, the community itself is taking initiative to try and safeguard themselves, to try to prepare reports, try to tie up with NGOs. And then maybe it's imageability. Perhaps a simply sort of something that is grade 2A or 1 existing in a locality is helping preserve its larger network. And sometimes it is simply being a part of a larger collective, where because it is a native town, it ties together the rest of the native towns which are all integral to Bombay. Perhaps that is what is helping preserve the space. Another key understanding of how we looked at creating the framework was understanding different types of heritage spaces and their role in preservation. So again, taking from Aldo Rossi's theories of how he categorized the types of heritage spaces, one being propelling and the other being pathological. So the pathological heritage is something that we can understand as, we tag it as grade 1 in India, but it's something that is simply monumentalized, Gateway, India Gate, stuff like that. While that is definitely a place marker, it doesn't necessarily, as we've been discussing, sort of propagate or facilitate natural dynamism of culture. It is a monument. It definitely promotes tourism and has that kind of funding. On the other hand, propelling heritage, a lot of times, as noticed, is not necessarily heritage that is categorized or preserved architecturally. They're usually categorized as 2B and 3, which by definition by MMR HCS promote streetscape, promote that sort of dynamic culture, but aren't sadly preserved or conserved. So what is the workaround then? And these propelling heritage are very important as they can be a landmark for the community, especially. They can be a driver, they can facilitate the sort of activity happening there, whether it's socio-economic or occupation-based, and definitely holds a lot of local historicity. Perhaps it is not of tourism value or cultural value for the entire nation, but definitely is to retain that sense of ownership that the community at the local level feels. Yeah, so at a broader idea, what we came up with is sort of these 5 core values that we feel can be adapted based on the context to be able to perhaps initiate preservation. How we're seeing it as that sometimes because of a lack of grading, conservation is not always possible. It's not, the direct route is not necessarily viable. So how do we go about it? Which would be, as we've been discussing or as we found, was to find a cultural core. Is it a practice? Is it a space? Is it something that the people are associating themselves with? What are the different semi-sacred spaces that align with it? Say if it's a temple, then the flower vendors become the semi-sacred spaces over there, or the dharamshalas, stuff like that. What are these sort of intangible influences, which is again, if it's a market, then it is the entire food narrative. So how do you uphold that? How do you support the whole framework so that eventually perhaps a push can be taken or put forward to be able to provide for conservation? So here we sort of went about 2 sort of cases between our 2 theses. The first looked at how can we locate a heritage space. So we looked at archival maps and tried to map it with existing situations of how the islands used to be of Bombay and what their semblance has today, to be able to really narrow down what has happened to the native towns and their heritage. What we found is that grade 2B and 3, again the most vulnerable ones, were located in Ward E. So perhaps that is a place where we can apply this resilience framework. We conducted a series of mappings where we tried to locate these vulnerable heritage spaces, and we overlaid it with newer infrastructural development to see how that fabric is being threatened, or what, where is really that hotspot. We did that essentially because we understand that by the role of modernization, the fabric is about to change for sure. But perhaps using again theories like skeleton of city, that even if the physical environment changes, how can we still retain that main skeleton? Can we still retain the culture even if the whole look changes of the neighborhood? Taking a deeper look into the hotspot that we identified, we understood that this entire fabric, which is has several disparate heritage spaces, particularly the Baikala station, which came up as early as CST, one of the earliest stations. While that is definitely conserved and preserved, a lot of the other spaces are not, because again they fall under grade 3 and 2B. The Baikala market, which was as relevant as Baikala station and holds as much public value, has no heritage listing. So while a new development of a bridge came about, it is crudely sort of passing above the market, completely foreshadowing it, which is quite the essence of what everywhere we're seeing in India now. Development is continuously overtaking culture. So what we identified is that while there is no cultural core over here in this disparate several heritage spaces, perhaps treating it as a precinct or trying to work towards making it as a precinct is the way towards preservation. And perhaps that market which is now being destroyed, even if that entire look changes, because again it's not heritage, not by any means, architecturally at least, perhaps reimagining it, redesigning it, or even holding that skeleton together can perhaps facilitate it as the cultural core. Applying the same framework to this case, we could see that perhaps, again, making the market as a cultural core could help define the precinct in a way. The several heritage spaces could be made as markers to tie together whole space as a larger network of public spaces of importance. The culture inherently could be reinforced with a larger food narrative, and of course integrating a larger program for how these municipal markets should be used, how much importance they should be given to be able to treat the urban fabric as a whole, provide for those newer issues that are propping up of no parking. These simple issues are what correcting them can simply add to the public dimension. Going to our second case, I would like my co-author to sort of. Yeah, it is the sort of part, but we're just applying the same framework to another site to be able to show the how relevant it could be.
Okay. Thank you for passing the mic over. I'll really try to keep it short as possible. Yeah. So while Sayam covered how to look at culturally significant spaces which have a core, this study looks at culturally significant spaces. So Sayam looked at spaces which does not have a core. This study looks at a culturally significant space which has a core, but the culture is fading away, which is the Parsi culture, which is sadly fading away faster than the population. So the study looks at understanding the basics at grassroots level, how Zoroastrian culture revolves around beliefs of reverence towards nature, particularly looking at the last rite rituals and commemorations and architectural spaces that evolved around these nuanced spaces. Also known as the Tower of Silence or Dokmenashi, it is among the most culturally significant Zoroastrian site, yet much of its history remains obscure and it's being steadily lost. So tracing back the narratives all the way to Uzbekistan, we started understanding where the ritual originated from, where there is almost no Tower of Silence left, since due to fading away Parsi population, and where Parsis first landed in India, Sanjan, there is just one Tower of Silence left, which is an archaeological site, which makes the site in Mumbai, which we are looking at currently, the only functioning Tower of Silence, which makes it even more crucial to save the practice, and by doing so, saving the faith at large. So this underscores the urgency to developing a framework for resilience, one that protects not only the built heritage but also the culture keeping at its heart. And to just quickly conclude, I'd like to say for both our cases, it's more than just preserving a physical structure. It's a fight to sustain a vanishing culture and to honor its traditions. Just thank you. Oh.
Next we have Mrudula Tatavarthi.
Hi everyone, I'm Mrudula. I'm the last speaker for the day, so please stay with me. My paper is about the social impact of 20th century town planning with Shivaji Park at the center of it, like the precinct around the park, to be more specific. So as everyone knows, Bombay or Mumbai is an eclectic mix of different architectural styles and movements, right? There is neoclassical, there is neo-Gothic, and there is Art Deco. People mostly know about the Art Deco around Marine Drive and near the Oval Maidan, both of which are in the southern tip of the city. So Shivaji Park gets kind of overlooked outside of the city. It's a grade 1 heritage park. It has produced a lot of legendary cricketers, and it has been the center of a lot of political movements. Before independence, it was established in 1927, so years leading up to the Indian independence. So there were a lot of political rallies for independence that happened. And after independence, it was the center for the Samyukta Maharashtra political movement. My paper basically talks about, the intersection of urban planning, the architectural heritage of the precinct, the community cohesion that is resulting because of these factors, and the challenges it's facing in the with the contemporary needs of the city. So let's begin with why suburbanization happened in Mumbai. So as we, Mumbai is an island city and most of it was concentrated in the south. So when Bombay plague in 1896 happened, the British government mainly believed that it was caused due to the overpopulation in the native settlements that were in chawls in, say, Girgaon, Kalba Devi, Bhuleshwar, other places. So as a measure to decongest the south, suburban areas were developed. So the first suburban areas that were developed were Dadar, Vadala and Matunga. And Shivaji Park is a part of Dadar and old Lower Mahim. So Shivaji Park was initially established in 1925. A whole precinct was planned around it, complete with schools, hospitals, and also a college. It also has a gymkhana of its own, a swimming pool. So it was really exemplary of 20th century Mumbai town planning, which were, self-contained townships of their own. These are some examples of the building. This is called Lakshmi Vilas. The pillars here are fashioned as lotus because lotus is the Vahan of Lakshmi goddess. The grill here, as you can see on the window, is shaped like a frozen fountain, which is the staple motif in Art Deco buildings, right? And of course, there is the raised eyebrow balconies. And a lot of these buildings were built and designed with, considering Shivaji Park as like the living room of the people residing in these buildings. So they always looked outwards and about the community. So this is another example of a building. It's called Gayatri Nilayam. It has a courtyard in between the apartment complex, which I found very unique. It's reminiscent of a Vada system house that is a traditional style of Maharashtrian house. So this courtyard runs through 3 floors, ground plus 2. So people, like all the residents, could like really interact with each other. All the children used to play in this square. And now you see there's a small temple of sorts where people could gather for prayers. And there's also an angan at the entrance of each ground floor level flat, where people could sit and chit chat with their neighbors, see what's going on the road or in the park. So it really encouraged people interacting with each other and being outdoors. Another aspect that I didn't really picture here, maybe I can look for it, is the katta. As you can see, there are 2 guys sitting over there. It's the low-lying boundary wall of the park. So that still today serves as like the meeting hub of all the residents there across age groups, where people sit after going for their morning walks. They have political debates there, and it's really like the living room of that neighborhood. So yeah, another unique aspect is the typology. As you can see, there are like a unique way of showing the building names in Marathi, in Devanagari. Now we are talking about the evolving neighborhood and the challenges to the heritage character of the park precinct. So one of the main problems is the poor maintenance of the buildings, which causes them to be dilapidated, because of which the residents are very de-incentivized from living inside these heritage apartments. They're actually positively motivated to ascend to redevelopment because of that. It can be seen because in 2014 there was actually a proposal put forth to give a heritage grading to the whole precinct, but it was vehemently protested against because people said that we can't live in these dilapidated structures anymore. Crux of that problem is the Pagdi system. As you can see the last point, it's a form of rental control before that was there since before independence, with which the tenants can co-own the property by paying a lump sum amount at the time of occupancy, at the initial time of occupancy, and then they give a nominal rent to the landlord. So that by that, the disadvantage is that tenants pay a ridiculously low amount of rent, which really doesn't correspond with the market prices. So the landowners, the landlords really are disadvantaged with that. And also the tenants, because the maintenance of the building can't be taken care of anyone, are living in a building that is not in a very good shape, and they don't have a lot of contemporary facilities. Also, a lot of these buildings are 1 RKs, 1 BHKs, 2 BHKs, and since at least the 10-15 years, we need more space for each family members. We need more privacy because of the individualistic needs of our society. So that is another problem that I interviewed my friend who lives in the precinct. So she said that. And of course, skyscrapers are seen as a sign of modernity. So a lot of residents are positively view redevelopment, because a lot of them think that that is our only chance to live in a skyscraper and have like the aerial view. Yeah, the issues, however, with the skyscraper is that it completely disregards the cohesion that original buildings had. Like all of them were ground plus 2 or ground plus 1. So there were no physical barriers there between the buildings. People could interact with each other quite easily. There was a connection between the building and the street. This development unfortunately creates like a physical barrier between the residents and the street and also their neighbors, which also kind of gives off like a perceived notion of progress, which sort of is disturbing the social cohesion of the neighborhood, which is not part of the Shivaji Park culture. It also affects the land to building ratio. Originally, it was the 1/3 of the plot only could be built over, but now that's not being followed. So the other original buildings lack ventilation because a tall skyscraper has come in front of them. And of course, there's a lot of deforestation that happens around these buildings. The last point is that it puts immense pressure on the resources of the precinct by increasing the population by a lot. So 10 years ago, Adarkar architects made a case for conservation, and they said that the existing 28 redevelopment projects increased the population by 48%. And this was 10 years ago. And since then, they estimated that in the future it will increase more than 300%, even if the project stayed at like 7 floors. Yeah, when I was researching, I came across this ad, which is a redevelopment ad, using Shivaji Park and the Heritage Precinct as a selling point, but they're actually demolishing the actual building and erecting a glass tower in place of it. Yeah. A lot of people look towards Oval Maidan for in a comparison, but I look towards Miami Beach district because economic situation is like very relevant in both the cases. I think that Oval Maidan, the residents of Oval Maidan have the means for conservation, which made it easier for them to advocate for it, and a lot of awareness as well. But unfortunately, economic consideration is a big problem in Shivaji Park. Yeah, here the case is similar. There are 800 buildings that were constructed between 1920s and 1940s to pastel perfection. The buildings feature a lot of distinctive characteristic decorative elements, typology, which are very visually striking. But by the 1970s, they had fallen into disrepair and they were facing demolition. Thankfully, Miami Design Preservation League stepped in with education drives for the community to first of all tell them about the value of the character of the space, then bring in regulations which would, I'll wrap it up, which would regulate, the future development and also give sort of a plan for the future so that it's not a open air museum anymore. Yeah, so I think it's very relevant because I have similar recommendations for Shivaji Park. So even though redevelopment is a necessary thing in big cities like Mumbai, where like there's a lot of pressure on resources, I think it should be reconsidered in cases like Shivaji Park, where the whole precinct has a important cultural and historic value. So it shouldn't be the first solution for the way forward. So first thing is adaptive reuse can be done of the heritage buildings. Then economic incentives for heritage conservation, such as transfer of developmental rights for the landowners and the tenants if they co-own the property. Then in case that there are new developments, they should adhere to the zoning laws, like the vertical development should be limited so that it's cohesive with its surroundings. And of course, the architectural elements should also be taken into consideration. Another important thing is community-centric urban design should be adopted for the new developmental projects, because the community cohesion is like a very big part of the culture in the heritage precinct. So the new spaces should feature communal spaces for the same. And of course, zoning and advocacy would be like the first step to do all of this, achieve all of this. Thank you.
If all the chairs and the speakers could just come forward for the discussion, we'll just have a short discussion because there isn't much time left. So please come forward quickly.
So I think this is the last session for today, and I think it's a very interesting theme and very relevant theme. Thank you to all the presenters, because these presentations were really interesting, and thanks Parul for inviting me to chair this session. I was particularly, I think it's very relevant today that we are looking at our cities, how the development pressures are, really stressing the cultural heritage. So cultural resilience becomes a very critical component. And all the presentations were very interesting. I'm familiar with most of the cities, so it was good to look at the, details that you went into. I will just specifically ask questions to each one of you because there are some very relevant points that have come across. So starting with the Ekamrashetra, which is also on the tentative listing, for UNESCO, and it was also initially during the smart city. In fact, it was the area that was first voted for to be taken up into smart city.
Yes.
But then the community and the people themselves felt that they need to take another area. So the government, which was keen on taking Ekamrashetra, instead of that, they took the newer area. So again, I mean, it's different situations. Like in case of Jaipur city, it was actually taken up because they wanted it. So it also shows that the residents of a city may prefer, cultural identity or, association with cultural aspects, and in other cases they may not. In Ekamrashetra, I think there were, you compared it with Varanasi and Ayodhya. And specifically what I was looking to see in your presentation was specific aspects, about the mathas that were demolished, or how it changed the urban character, and what did the residents lose. So maybe because of shortage of time, you didn't cover. I'm sure you've. So I would like you to, to respond on that specifically.
We have actually we have documented all the mathas, and we had a conversation that time with the owners that they are not willing to demolish them because it's a revenue generating factor for them. But actually we are not able to get in touch with them after the demolition project. So we are not sure how they are reacting, but through the news and the reports which we have been studying as a literature, they don't want to be just left out from the place, because the displacement has made them lose their economy actually. There is a guarantee by the government that because of these development projects they will actually get the revenue more, because there will be the more downfall of the tourism and all. But somewhere we feel that tourism is still there, and it is going to be same. I mean, if you are opening up more, maybe the downfall will be more, but how are they going to accommodate all the customers, and where? Because now the space is not there. In front of the Lingaraj temple, there were the all the show up owners for the puja samagri and all. So now you are shifting them, then who is going to go to the other side and buy? Everyone wants to buy it in front of the mandir itself. So what we are telling is there should be a approach of development. We are not stopping the development, because development is going to happen, but we need a approach which is community centric, which gives them economies also, and at the same time you are doing the development without having this cultural identity lost in the places. So that's why we compare the Varanasi and Ayodhya, because the same situation has happened to both the places. The people who are, their houses are demolished and they are removed from their places, they are not happy. No, not even people in Ayodhya. So we cannot stop the development, but we can at least have a different perspective for the development. And for that we can have, all of us together, we can move forward and have an approach which we can give to government, that this can be followed for all these culturally heritage sites.
Right. So before I move forward, should I ask my questions to everyone,
Yes,
and then
please.
you do it alongside?
Yes, please.
Fine. So, okay, thanks for this response. Now, for Abhilasha, like Jaipur is something I'm very, very familiar with. So, I just wanted to tell you that in the Wall City, you said Havelis are not included, but they are inscribed in the World Heritage City.
Okay.
So, or in the Wall City also, all the Havelis are part of the World Heritage.
Okay. No. So there are some pockets which are, I think,
No pockets. All the walled area within the walls, all the 9 chokris are inscribed.
including the internal names.
Every
and
structure,
everything.
every structure.
Okay. I
Yeah,
love it.
yeah. So you had, of course, interesting examples. Johari Haveli is a benchmark in itself. So I'm not going to ask you about the inside walled city because that's very much sort of fixed.
Yeah.
But you talked about the development pressures outside, and you specifically looked at, of course, one point was because you were talking about housing. So I was wondering why you didn't mention Vidyadhar Nagar, which was is an example where it is a copy of the or inspired by the historic city. But what I found interesting was in the axis that you spoke about. You're talking about the new hospital that is a tall structure rising behind Albert Hall, and then you talk about the JKK which is there, and then you talk about the World Trade Center, and you showed the Jaipur the gateway. So these are very different. And what I want to ask you is, now these are disparate examples of iconic architectural landmarks that everybody is trying to create. So what is your you said that some kind of study is recommended, but I want to understand what do you feel is the right approach, because these 3-4 are really different in terms of their approach. So is there one particular kind that you are recommending, or a process that you feel for this entire urban character of 20th 21st century?
So ma'am, particularly I did not speak about Vidyadhar Nagar because when it was made, it was entirely new. What I wanted to point out was towards the already built structures which are undergoing construction again, so to say, one thing. So hence I specified especially the C scheme. When it comes to the axis, I think a more sensitive approach is needed, because I also feel that there is an inclination towards making more monumental developments, so to say, so that they create benchmarks. But where the problem is that when it is not done with sensitivity, especially now that we live in an age of social media and the world is in our hands basically. So what problem it makes is that a lot of people also perceive the Patrika Gate in particular as a heritage monument in itself, when it is not. So my recommendation is that even if we are following a traditional way of architecture to create a building, the approach should be more sensitized in terms of, even if we are using architectural elements, so to say, they need to basically follow at least the basic principles of it. The point is that even with the modern developments, the buildings speak for themselves, which is fine. They speak of the time that they are made in. But when it comes to structures which use traditional elements in particular and not the entire principle of it, what happens is misinformation. And hence it impacts the perception with the entire public. So I think, as I mentioned in what I was talking about, that I feel a more diversified body is recommended, at least from my side, that of urban designers, of conservation architects. And because right now in the government, even when they're trying to promote heritage, it's basically engineer based. When it comes with urban designers and every people with different sort of specializations, I think a collective thought will end up making it more sensitized. For example, there is a heritage cell where the proposals get approved, basically, that what can be done, what cannot be done. But there is still a gap that needs to be filled.
Okay, so probably you're suggesting something like DUAC, the Delhi Urban Arts Commission, for new areas of Jaipur, which might be a point. Of course, the Jaipur Patrika Gate is quite an interesting case study, I would say, because I, as an expert, when I see it, I feel, oh, it's not heritage, but when I see its impact, so I would, in fact, going to the next, speakers, I would, consider whether it has actually helped in cultural resilience. That was a space which had nothing cultural, but it actually was created, and it's become like a, hub in the evening, and everybody relates or links to those styles and Jaipur as such.
Yes.
So, now if I look at it critically, and I keep my expertise aside, then as a resident of Jaipur, it's a great place. It
Of
links to
course.
the city identity. So that is something probably we need to look at, whether sometimes, the copying is working
Yeah.
for the general public. And when we are saying community centric, then should we, put our intellectual glasses and say, no, it has to be a elite designer oriented kind of a thing.
If I
So,
can add
yeah.
a little bit to the perspective that you just shared. So, I have been interviewing professionals as well and other people, and I've been talking about this. One of the perceptions that also came in was that the true heritage for general public is the city palace, and which is still intact in its form. They find it a little bit inapproachable. But with the setting of Patrika Gate, they can experience that heritage whenever they want. So that is one of the primary reasons that it has become so popular massly.
So that's definitely an interesting case, I would say. For the Mumbai studies, both the presentations, I think those were very well, presented. The methodology, the analysis that you had, and my questions are somewhat similar, because I think, the resilience framework is interesting, and you used it in two cases where there is a core and there is not a core. So that's a very good example. And you could take examples like we said, where certain cores have been created and whether they have been successful or they can be called core or not. What my question, and the Shivaji Park also very interesting, especially when you say Oval Maidan, and the point that they are already aware, and that's how it became a World Heritage Site. They are conserving vis-a-vis Shivaji Park, which is something we see in the Jaipur historic city, because that affluence and awareness is not as much there, though the government rules are there. But my question for both the Mumbai presentations is regarding the grading. Grading system is something we've been using since ages. It started with the Mumbai and Hyderabad bylaws. And I really question this grading, whether it is valid or not, because this is again something colonial, or what has been given to us, that this should be grade 1, 2, 3. And in your cases, you've seen the moment you get into grading, it becomes individual structures and the whole urban aspect is lost. So in that sense, would you really review grading as a system? Do we need something more of an urban level for protection? In your recommendations, in the last one, like I saw in the slide, you're saying preserving architectural landmarks. So again, that is saying, okay, in that sense, we can't grade everything one and just preserve everything, right? So is it, my question to both of you is, and especially with the Mumbai case, is do you feel grading is really the way to go? What could be the other solutions for the city?
Okay. So I think part of our presentation also tried to highlight that the grading system, while it works for grade 1 or the very monumentalized heritage spaces for conservation for sure, it definitely completely disregards, as you mentioned, the urban fabric, the larger networks, and especially the nuanced street level experiences of dynamic culture that happens on a day-to-day. So while I do not have an answer of what should be the other way to look at it, I think an example which actually drove both of us to look at our specific cases was at a symposium like this, where someone was very emotionally speaking about Baikala, but just the restaurant, not heritage, but speaking about it that is what combined all the different religions and diverse communities that occupied Baikala. And that made me really think that, okay, that's not heritage. That is old, but that has nothing technically that can be found on paper.
It's intangible.
It's intangible. So what do you do then? While I completely have no experience of how to try to measure intangible culture, how to even find it, we felt our sort of disparate or different cases were trying to get to the same thing from different point of views, where something is already associated with culture space, and while mine has some sort of historical relevance. So I don't think I have the complete answer yet, but trying to look at history and public use, not even necessarily like how it is viewed or perception, just utility is something that would make a culturally significant space.
Utility for the people.
Utility
Yeah.
for the people.
Like has to have meaning rather
to have
than
meaning.
utility.
Yeah,
You can
yeah.
because you're talking about the intangibles. So I
Intangible,
think
yeah.
that's where your solution is.
Yeah.
It's with the community. They
Correct.
value something and how to translate that value into your cultural resilience
Yeah.
character.
Yeah, to add to that, I agree. Like, the grading system is really arbitrary and it's a top-down thing, and it doesn't really work for either Baikala Market nor Shivaji Park because the community needs to be at the center of it. So I think it's very important to empower the community itself to conserve, first to understand the characteristic of their neighborhood because like at least okay, thank you. So yeah, so Shivaji Park residents definitely do value their surroundings, their buildings, but they don't really understand the heritage aspect of it, nor do they have the means to conserve it, right? So I think a body, a civic body, which helps the residents with following, understanding and following regulations, and also like regulation of Pagdi system would be like a very good starting point because I think Pagdi system as it functions right now, the person I interviewed, my friend, it's like it seems like a lose-lose situation for both the landlord and the tenants because yeah, the existing system, the landlord is losing out on economic progress and the tenant doesn't really have a proper ownership, so their accommodation is also very like uncertain. So and it all results in deterioration of the heritage of the place. So if TDR is given to the landlord and also like there is some incentive, economic incentive from the government or funding from the government to restore the buildings, at least the facades, I think that would be a good starting point.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think if TDR links to the Pagdi system, though of course there are concerns about the TDR being effective in Mumbai. I think in Ahmedabad they tried, which was a bit more effective, especially in the heritage sectors. But TDR definitely is one point, and also in terms of urban level, because there are master plans. If we see in Western context, France has these for historic cities. So rather than saying grade 1 or grade 2, it is clear that the entire street is protected. So the street facades, and so basically we need to look at our historic cities, whether they are historic cities, the complete vistas, or like in case of Jaipur, the new complete axis with a certain character. And of course urban planning is an important component. So that's why I'll now give it to Dr. Neeti Trivedi.
Thank you. I think ma'am has summarized it and asked all the questions very, very well. I don't think I need to say anything. Just a couple of points. Excellent documentation by all of you. The mapping was to the point at all levels. Just from my point of view, I felt that both the presentations need to be tied up together, maybe because of the lack of timing. Because you have all the answers, but I couldn't see those answers in the presentation. And very similar points that ma'am has mentioned, I have mentioned it in my notes as well. So I just felt that maybe it needs to be tied up together, that's all. And for you, I had the same question about the chokris that ma'am mentioned. So yeah, that's it. Thank you so much. Do we have any questions?
It was a very impressive visual.
It was for both of our theses actually, so we had a lot more. It was hard to shorten it, as you could tell from the very elaborate presentation.
I have one question. The restaurant in Baikala that you mentioned, is it Regal Restaurant?
No, so that is still there. That was in the presentation. This was called just Baikala Restaurant.
Okay.
There's a Burger King there in place now. It went over the pandemic.
Yeah, I love the disgust in your face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So any other questions? Or everybody's too exhausted. But do the presenters have any question for each other?
One last question about bike, because I go through that street every day for work. There is a flyover coming
Yes.
up which really ruins the whole cityscape of the space.
Yeah.
What do you think would be an alternative? Because we are more driven towards a car moving city, right?
Yeah.
So
That actually became the start point of my thesis, that again development, because it is a bridge, is taking over the market culture. So first I tried to, for my thesis as well, try to completely negate what if the bridge is not built. Again, idealistically, just to hypothesize. But then we looked at the papers, and because there's an existing flyover which is 100 years old, that is in dilapidated condition, hence you need the new bridge to, again, they statistically prove it, so you cannot defy it, plus they started construction. But what the thesis ended up exploring was that development is inevitable. We as designers then perhaps, or urban planners or designers, need to level up in a way that if from one side, the government side, or as a lot of times the engineering side is not being able to cooperate with the public or design realm, perhaps we need to, again, a little bit more pressure on the urban design side, but that is where design thrives, where there is limitation. Need to coexist with the bridge or with the development and still try to have that urban fabric, which may look completely different. I can't make the market under the bridge or the market to overshadow the bridge. But if somewhere both of them look a part of the public space, maybe that is where the solution lies.
Yeah, I think that's an important point because, I mean, of course, in India, we've seen engineers are dominating everywhere, whether it's the architects or urban planners, and that's why our cities are in such a chaos. But the bridges and how they are dealt with in historic cities, that can be actually a symposium in itself, on how to balance. I know in my life, I saw one presentation, and that was from the city of Taiwan, where they showed how near a historic space, which was a public urban space, there was the government made a bridge and like a flyover kind of a thing. And for a few years, the whole space was destroyed. And how the community came back, they raised their voice against the bridge was demolished. So that is one case I see where the newly constructed bridge is demolished and the space is given back to the public. So I think that's where our solution lies, because when it's engineering and all this happens, finally it's the public voice, the intangible and what they value, and as long as they do that, I think that's where we probably will find our solution.
Nowadays, I feel that politically it is driven so much that even when public wants to have their space, they cannot have it. I mean, India is in a very different condition now, I feel.
But India is, still the largest democracy in the world. So I think it may be subdued, it may be, but it will finally come up.
Yeah,
So we should not.
I wish it comes back.
I
Yeah.
to be optimistic.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have to be.
I've
Just
often wondered if
yeah.
like a underground tunnel would be a solution in these situations, because the car traffic is not going to reduce anytime soon. Like we are not in Netherlands that people are going to start cycling.
but I mean, even if we are 50 years behind,
Yeah.
like Netherlands, now they are coming back to it. They are going
Yeah.
back to cycling. They are going back. And in fact, in smart cities, I was surprised because I heard municipal commissioners saying, "Let's do pedestrianization.
Yes.
Let's do." So a
Yeah.
lot of mind change was there.
Yeah.
So we should not give up.
Yeah.
with
Yeah,
our
yeah.
visionaries.
For
We can
sure.
introduce e-rickshaws and other facilities which are possible. Like these are the solutions that what we were talking about for the Ekamrashetra, where they are specifying that there is a lot of traffic and we need to widen up the road. Not necessary widening up the road is only the solution.
Public
We can look for different perspectives also.
True.
And people are ready to do that. दर्शन करने के लिए कोई कैसे भी पहुंचेगा जिसको जाना है.
True.
Just one last comment I thought I'll, because you were talking about Baikala, I always tell my students that city is a living organism. So you have to understand that, it is going to change, it is going to either grow fat, or it's going to go thin, or it's going to grow tall, 6 feet tall. So you just have to be prepared for it. Even as planners, we try to have a vision for 20 years. None of us have seen what's going to be there in the future, but we still plan it. So as designers also, we have to understand that it's a process, and as humans we adapt. So whatever best we can do out of it and be optimistic with whatever situations come in, I think that could be one way to go forward, because you are young designers, so maybe let's be optimistic.
So thank you, everyone.
Thank
for
you.
this session.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Back
much.
so late, and thanks to my co.
Yes.